I was a little chunker who frequented local convenience stores for bags of hot Cheetos. That was my favorite. Hello and welcome to The Command Podcast, where our mission is to help you take command of your mind, your body, and your future. To create a powerful, effective individual who has a desire to immerse themselves in greatness. So that as highly effective individuals, together we can unify and assume command of our environments, our communities, and our country to do our part in preserving freedom. Join me on this mission of becoming the next generation of leaders to make living with integrity badass again. I'm your host, Trent Niebersall, and now it is time to take command. This is The Command Podcast number 36, and today I'm going to continue reading my book. So this will be part 2 of reading my book, chapter 2. If you didn't go back and listen to podcast number 34, go listen to that because that was the introduction to my book. And now today I'm going to get into chapter number 2. So again, if you haven't listened to that, go listen to chapter 1 first on podcast number 34, and then come and listen to this one. So today's going to be a kind of little bit of a tough one for me because today is the about part about your instructor in my book, The Command Project, Take Command of Your Mind, Body, and Future. So, there's a lot in here that I've probably never talked to, at least online. So this will be a little bit of a tough one for me to get out there. It'll be the first time that I probably talked about a lot of this. So bear with me and thank you for being here. I appreciate it. But I think it's important, in my workbook and stuff for people to know who they're learning from. All right, so all of the chapters start with one of my favorite quotes that sort of relate to that chapter. So the quote at the beginning of this chapter is, "In life, our job is this, to divide and distinguish things into 2 categories. Externals I cannot control, but the choices I make with regards to them I do control. Where will I find good and bad? In me, in my choices." Epictetus, an ancient philosopher, Stoic philosopher. All right, so let's go and dive in. Before we dive into taking command of your life, I think it's important to give you some backstory on myself so that you know how I started. This is why it's so important to me. So so that you can know how I started and why it's so important to me. My name is Trent Niebersall. At the time of writing this, I am 27 years old. Now I'm 28. Wrote this last year, 2022. I know it is a young age to believe I can help people change their lives, but I think you will understand if you hear my story. I do not claim to have it all figured out. I have some things figured out, but I will never stop growing and learning in all areas necessary to create the life and impact I am committed to. I do not tell you my story to make anyone feel bad, but rather in hopes that some can relate to the struggles. I do not intend to throw shade on anyone in this story, as I love them all. Life is made up of struggles, but it's the story you tell yourself about those struggles that make you who you are. This made me who I am today, and I feel I have every right to tell it the way it happened. So let's start from the beginning. I was born and grew up in the suburbs of Sacramento, California. Growing up as a young kid wasn't the best situation, as both of my parents struggled with alcohol. I won't go into detail about these earlier times, but it wasn't the best situation to grow up in by any means. The sheriff coming to our house was a regular occurrence, usually multiple times per week. On top of that, I grew up as a fat kid. I was a little chunker who frequented local convenience stores for bags of hot Cheetos. That was my favorite. I was overweight until about my sophomore year in high school. In the early years, Child Protective Services took my sister and me from our parents due to law enforcement getting involved too often and our school having concerns due to the alcohol problems in the household. Luckily, our grandparents were there to take us in, so we did not go to a foster home. My mom went and got sober at this time, but my dad did not. Unfortunately, his drinking got worse. My father was not willing to quit drinking, so shortly after that, my parents got a divorce. I was about 12 to 13 years old at the time. I had a couple of good years living with my mom. Although we didn't have much money, she did what she had to ensure that we had a place to live. We lived with a boyfriend of hers for a while, and he was a good man. We did a decent amount of things like fishing, and it was a stable house. Then they separated, and after that, she moved with a friend, and I moved in with my pops. Shortly after, my mom got very sick one day, and her lungs collapsed. She was in the ICU in an induced coma on a ventilator for an entire month. The doctors told us that she was getting worse, and every time they tried to take her off the ventilator, her lungs would start to collapse. At this time, I was 16 years old. Eventually, the doctors told my sister and me that we had to make a decision to take her off the ventilator because there was little to no hope. And now that I think about it while I'm reading this, I think I was 15 when this happened. So they told us there was very little to no hope. By this time, my sister was 18, so technically she was the one that would have to make the decision to take her off the ventilator. Those were tough days. Then the day before we were going to have to make that decision, a miracle happened. She unexpectedly started improving and talking to the nurses. A week later, I was bringing her In-N-Out burger and a milkshake. I would have never believed in miracles if it weren't for this. But this was an absolute miracle. She came out of a coma and got better after the doctor said there was no hope. I love you, Ma. Shortly after this, my mom moved to Oregon with her sister because she had to do what was best for her, and I needed her to take care of herself. I must talk about my grandpa Myron for a moment because before returning to the rest of the story, because he contributed much to who I am today. He lived outside of Coos Bay, Oregon. He was a retired Los Angeles County Sheriff, deputy, and gunsmith. You could say he was an avid hunter and gun nut. He had a shooting range in his yard and 550 acres of logging land behind him that he patrolled for the logging company. I would stay at his house a few times a year throughout these times. I would hunt deer and elk and hike miles and miles per day. This is how I quit being fat. I shot my first buck behind his house. I would ride his Polaris 700 4x4 ATV all over the property. We would go fishing and crabbing in Coos Bay, the Pacific Ocean, and the Coquille River. One time we took his 22-foot Woodridge aluminum boat 30 miles out of the mouth of Coos Bay looking for tuna. We didn't have any luck finding tuna, but there were shad baitfish jumping as far as the eye could see. It was amazing. On our way back in, we baited up for salmon, and I caught a nice coho salmon just out of the mouth of Coos Bay. I remember going crabbing and getting so many that I had to throw the smaller ones back to keep the big ones to stay at our legal limit. So we're sizing them up, throwing the little ones back, keeping the bigger ones. I treasure the times I spent up there because that is where I learned to love the outdoors. I also grew up hunting deer here in California with my friends and their dads, but there's nothing like having the outdoors right out your back door. He passed away a few years ago. One of the most challenging times in my life. I was sitting in the hospital for over a month with my lady Chloe, now my wife, by my side, hoping that being there would give him a reason to pull through. Man, that was a hard time. We stayed all the way up to the night he passed, sleeping in the hospital chairs in his room most of those nights so he would not be alone. Even though he was in an induced coma and on a ventilator, I will always cherish the times I spent with him. All those days hunting and fishing at the Myrtle Point, all those days hunting and fishing going to the Myrtle Point Gun Club every Thursday to shoot skeet, in the Bandon Gun Club every Saturday to shoot trap. Yep, that's a pretty tough story to me, because he was my biggest role model. Now back to the rest of the story. When I moved into my pops, I was about 15 years old. At this point, he was a pretty bad alcoholic, drunk 24/7. And if you guys know what a real alcoholic is, it's bad. It's not somebody who drinks every day after work. It's like you don't work and you lay in bed and you drink all the time and you don't get out of bed. If you know what real alcoholism is, you know what I mean. I could get away with anything living there. I started smoking weed at about 13 years old. I smoked every day from age 14 to 18. My life revolved around getting high with my friends. I was never good in school, barely got by in elementary school, failed all through high school, and had more days truant than actually going. I spent 75% of my high school years homeschooling and barely getting by. I literally paid someone to do most of my senior year of high school work. I'll go and add to that. I paid them with weed. So that's just how it was. Living at my pops, we had to fend for ourselves for the most part. My sister was always there for me, but she is only a few years older. I started working full time when I was 15 to feed myself. I worked in a shop rebuilding hybrid batteries for almost 4 years. Although I was not a school person and smoked a lot of weed, I still made money and always wanted to do better. Unfortunately, our house was not the best place for a teenager. My sister had a boyfriend who was 25, around 10 years older than me. He and I would get into fights regularly. I still have the scar from a broken nose to this day. They would have parties with 20 to 30 plus people every night and concerts with their punk rock music in the backyard shed. Needless to say, it was quite a dysfunctional household. We had roommates and people in the house that did drugs like meth and heroin. I should add that I never did drugs like these. Although I lived in a shitty environment, smoked weed, drank, was young, and made plenty of bad decisions, I still had a good enough head on my shoulders for the most part. I had no interest in doing immoral things or hurting others. From here, the bad only got worse. One night, someone got stabbed about 10 times in our house, and the guy who got stabbed almost bled out in our backyard. I wasn't home when this happened, but I remember coming home and seeing all the blood splatter on the walls. My father and I got into some pretty bad fights during this time. I'm not proud of those fights, but I felt like I did what I had to do at the time. We had a couple of roommates in gangs for a few years. Being young and with no one to look up to, I began looking up to them. For a couple of years, I planned on joining this gang when I turned 18. I spent a lot of time with them. I can see how easy it could be for a young person in a bad environment to get wrapped up in the wrong crowd, to feel like being a part of something. And that something being a gang. So this life went on for years, a few years. You could say it was a complete shit show. Then something changed my life forever when I was about 16 or 17. One day, I was up in South Lake Tahoe with two of my very good friends, who are still my friends to this day, David and Mike. We were taking a walk down by the creek across from David's family's Tahoe house when I got a call from one of my roommates. It was tough. It's tough to read this. This is one of my roommates that was in the gang that I looked up to. You need to come home. Me, why? I can't tell you, you just need to come home now. Me, I'm not coming home until you tell me why. It's your dad. He's gone. My heart sank. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Me, there's no reason for me to come home then. I knew that the life that my dad was living couldn't go on forever, but you never think something like that is actually going to happen. His actions from drinking caused him to lose his life. The last memory I have is walking past him on the road, and he had a black eye because of a fight that we had gotten into. He was full of shame, and I will never be able to get that picture out of my head. I want to make something clear. My father was a great man. He had a huge heart and always gave the shirt off of his back to anyone in need. I don't think about this stuff much, so when I actually read this and think about it, it definitely brings up some emotions. My father was a great man. He had a huge heart and always gave the shirt off of his back to anyone in need. Unfortunately, he had demons that he could not overcome. So none of this is a discount to him. I want to make that very clear. I thank my father for his heart, which I believe I inherited. He was a good man, very kind, and like to help others. I miss him and love him very much to this day. I still have many great memories of him growing up. He didn't always have a drinking problem this bad. I remember many great things as a younger child, like camping and fishing with him. He was funny, caring, and an extremely hard worker. We lived in the house for probably another year after his passing, still in the same situation as before. Then everyone started to move out because the water and power was turned off. The house had been in foreclosure for years, and this is the time where they weren't really kicking people out because there's so many foreclosures after 2008. The house had been in foreclosure for years, but the bank finally kicked us out when the utilities were turned off. I was the last to leave. As the old tweaker roommates stripped the copper from the house, I stayed for a few weeks before I couldn't stay any longer. The house was disgusting, torn apart, and filled with awful memories. After leaving, I bounced around living with friends. I was blessed to have so many good friends. You guys know who you are. And I love and appreciate every one of you. I also had my baby puppy girl, Shelby. She had her litter a couple of years. We had her litter a couple of years before, and I love that dog so much. I remember bouncing around to friends' houses and living out of my truck for 6 months. One time with Shelby girl, we literally lived out of my truck for 6 months, but was still bouncing around to friends' houses, but figured it out where most people would be putting their, it's in the book. In a situation where most would be trying to find a home for their dog, that was never an option for me. She was my baby and would even come to work with me. Luckily at that time I had a job that allowed me to bring her to work. So things started to change when I moved out of the house I grew up in. At this point I was 18 years old. I began to think about what a real man is and what I wanted to do with my life. I was tired of struggling, being broke, and not having control over my life. I always sought the next high, only to struggle with every other aspect of my life. The only thing I was absolutely dedicated to besides getting high was lifting weights. I started lifting weights regularly when I was 15. That is where I found my salvation. I was also trying to escape the pain of growing up fat, getting picked on for that, and not being good with the ladies. I figured being big and strong would fix all that. I fell in love with the gym, spending 2 to 3 hours there every day through high school. It had a massive part in creating a solid foundation, my roots, which I will get to later in the book, for who I am today. Fitness showed me that if you are disciplined and put in the work, you will achieve a result. So if you put in work, you will achieve a result. Looking back at the people I look up to in those tough times, I began to redefine what it means to be a man, to be a badass motherfucker. I realized that being a man is about being successful, acquiring the skills to provide for a family, and consistently working to become a better version of yourself. I always had a moral compass, but having to provide and fend for myself at the age of 15 forced me to grow up at a young age and have this realization young. For Christ's sakes, I was going to join a gang, but God had a different path for me. Now at this point, my living environment was much better. I jumped around for quite a while and lived out of my truck, but eventually my sister and I got a place. So I was already working full time and I worked out every day and had a place to live. So what came next? Well, I wanted to make more money. At this time, I smoked a lot of weed. Like, I'm talking 8 blunts daily with dabs in between. For those of you that have ever smoked, you might know what I'm talking about. I could never do that now, nor would I. I knew that all the good paying jobs do a drug test. I knew that if I wanted better for myself, I had to quit. So one day I quit cold turkey. Then 6 months later, I started a job at an asphalt milling company as their new shop bitch. Yep, I was a shop bitch for a couple years. I spent 2 years at the shop as the shop bitch, doing everything from cleaning the toilets to doing services on the machines and doing track pads, track rails, all kinds of stuff, working on the equipment. I learned a lot in those 2 years, from taking pride in my work to working on machines. Then I studied and got my Class A commercial driver's license. After working in the shop for a couple of years, I started working out. In the field. At this point, I was a member of the Operating Engineers Union. My pay almost tripled when I got into the operators. This job taught me how to work, and we work long hours with little time off. I mean, a lot of hours. We would work doubles and triples, meaning we would do one job, load up, haul it to the next job that night, work for 10 hours, then load up again and haul it to a third job the following day. You would sometimes be on the clock for over 30 hours straight. This hectic work schedule taught me how to work hard, but I allowed other areas of my life to begin lacking, like my health and fitness. We spend about 150 days per year in a hotel or more. This means you cannot cook for yourself and you usually don't have a gym. On top of that, you are tired. During my first year, a full year in the field, I fell prey to excuses. I would tell myself things like this: you worked hard today and deserve a cheeseburger, fries, and a shake. You had a long day. You don't need to work out. I need more equipment and bigger weights. I can't do anything with the little gym or the hotel gym. You worked hard today. You can have a 6-pack of beer and not work out and eat whatever you want. This led me to gain about 40 pounds of fat and losing all of the muscle that I had built over the years. I wouldn't even look at myself in the mirror because I didn't want to face reality. These lies I would tell myself led me to utter disappointment in myself. Finally, one day I looked in the mirror and was disgusted with the person I saw looking back at me. You guys might hear me talk about this story a lot in my content because it's basically was a turning point in my life. So finally, one day I looked in the mirror and was disgusted with the person I saw looking back at me. I finally hit a pain threshold and decided to turn it around. I proceeded to lose 30 pounds in the next 6 weeks and got back to being disciplined. This story doesn't end there because since then I have had many ups and downs in my health and fitness. My highly demanding work schedule would get the best of me each year towards the end of the season. However, I did improve and held out longer and longer each year. I tell you this because I'm by no means perfect. I struggle with the same excuses you do. I've learned a lot through those ups and downs, and you will find many tools in this program to help you stay on track and get back on quickly when you fall off, like I have so many times. Now back to the story. At this point, my life is much better than those earlier years because I decided to change. Although I still struggled with many things, I was now in control of my environment. I had many good times in these years with great friends. At this point in my story, I am 21 years old and a heavy equipment operator. I had achieved the goal of increasing my income. This again reinforces the fact that hard work will produce a result. So, what is the next objective? I wanted to own a home. I have always been an outdoor person and love camping, hunting, and fishing. I'm not a city person. I wanted to walk around my property, drinking beer, shooting guns in my boxers just like you could at Granddad's. Joking, kind of. Not that I did, well, yeah. So I started looking for homes on property up in the mountains. I fell in love with the house perched on top of a mountain on 10 acres in the Sierra Nevadas in Northern California. This place has a 180-degree view to kill. You can see over 100 miles away on a clear night. It's also 10 minutes from Coloma, the gold discovery site that sparked the gold rush. So my real estate buddy Mike, the same Mike I mentioned earlier, put in an offer for me. I'll be damned that offer was accepted. I just so happen to be sitting in that home right now as I type this, looking at that view, and as I sit here now. So now I've made it. I'm a homeowner, right? Not quite. Now you are just a slave to your job. But you live somewhere pretty cool. Now I've got to get myself a lady. Shortly after I closed my new home, I met the love of my life, Miss Chloe Jane. She is the kindest, loving person you will ever meet. She's never done drugs, never lied, never drank, and always put everyone else ahead of herself. Just a beautiful human inside and out. We are going on our 6th anniversary. We have had many ups and downs, but we have had a great relationship and hold each other to a high standard. We have helped each other through some tough times, and she has helped me become a better human. I love you, Chloe. And she's now my wife. So, yeah. So I got the lady, the job, and the house. I'm set now, right? Nope, not even. You see, I'm the type of person that will never settle. Those early days of struggle created a lot of pain and suffering, which I wish never to return to again. Ever since I was young, I have wanted to be great. I wanted to be successful. I wanted to be the best. I have shown myself that if you work to grow and move forward, a result will come. Along with working out, I also fell in love with personal development. I started reading books, going to seminars, buying courses, and hiring coaches to learn how to become successful. Well, I'll tell you, I'm still not rich. I attempted to start multiple businesses and lost tens of thousands of dollars, but in the end, it allowed me to figure out what I really wanted to do. I learned a lot from those failures. So each failure, as long as you take a lesson from it, you still won. Remember, the stories you tell yourself about situations will make or break you. Focus on the lessons you can take from each failure and move on. I figured out I wanted to help people. That's what I wanted to go into business for. Unfortunately for me at the time, I'm too honest to be a fraud. Although I had a wonderful life at the time, I still struggled with the same things you do, probably even more so. At least I feel like that. Everybody feels like their struggles are the worst because they're experiencing them personally. I knew a lot about fitness and nutrition, but who wants to learn from someone who still struggles with everything else in their life? I would attribute most of my setbacks to cheap dopamine rewards and comfort, as discussed in the introduction, but also to a lack of self-belief. Yeah, I quit smoking weed years ago, but drinking took its place. I've been an on and off drinker since I was about 15 years old. I've seen the absolute worst that alcohol can do, but still, I would give into it to escape my reality. I never drink too much regularly. So I ended up recording the whole thing and then realized that the camera shut off. So here I am picking back up where that last one left off. We'll go and dive right back in. My problem was drinking too often, just having 2 to 3 beers every day after work. When I was young, I would drink too much and we would party hard. But as I got a little bit older, I just want a couple beers after work every day. This would quell my desire to achieve. Since I knew what alcohol could do to someone, I would keep it in check, taking a few months off yearly to prove to myself that I could quit. I realized that whenever I drank, I would never work towards my future. When I do not drink, I light a fire in my soul that can drive greatness. I tell you this part of the story because if you are like me, you must be addicted to something. That something can either be drugs, alcohol, or it can be personal growth. I chose personal growth. Which are you going to choose? Alcohol suppresses my dreams, so if it does yours too, quitting may be the only way to make them come true. I also tell you this because, as I said, I struggled with self-belief. Without believing in yourself, you cannot create anything significant. First of all, if you do not believe something is possible, you will never try. If you think something is possible but don't believe in yourself, you will not have the confidence to pursue it. Self-belief is required to become great. So over the next few years, I went on a journey to prove myself to create self-belief. We have gone on quite a ride so far in this story, but it's about to get to my favorite part, the part of the story where I prove myself to myself. As a man, I have always wanted to be a badass and inspire others, and I think most men would like to do this. One day I had this crazy idea to climb a mountain. It just sounded hard, a different kind of hard than the discipline of going to the gym. So I set my sights on a peak about an hour and a half drive from me, Pyramid Peak. Standing at 9,986 feet, Pyramid Peak is the tallest peak in the Crystal Range of the Sierra Nevadas, just to the west of Lake Tahoe, located in Desolation Wilderness. If you climb mountains, it's just a challenging training hike. If you don't, it's a full day of suffering, especially in the snow. With 4,300 feet of elevation gain over a short distance of 4 miles to get to the top, it's brutal with nothing but steep uphill terrain. It was late winter, so there was still about 6 feet of snow. I didn't have any equipment or experience at this time, so I rented a pair of snowshoes from REI. Before I left, I decided I would not quit, no matter how badly I suffered. So I arrived at the Long Canyon Trailhead before sunrise and set off on this brutal hike. On this day, I fell in love with climbing mountains. What I fell in love with even more than the spectacular views at the top that changed my life was that I fell in love with suffering. I fell in love with taking pride in doing what most others aren't willing to do. I found the part of me that buried deep within that can accomplish the task at hand no matter what the fuck is going on in my head. Since then, I have climbed Pyramid Peak 8 times. After that first summit, I began to conquer the tallest peaks, moving south in the Sierra Nevadas. Even climbed it at night one time to go watch the sun. Well, I watched the sunset from the top and it was amazing. From 10,000 feet, then hiked down in the dark. Setting new limits became an obsession. Growing up, I was more reserved, didn't want to get hurt, and didn't like taking risks. This all changed after that first summit. From Pyramid, I started working south. Round Top at Carson Pass in McCallamy Wilderness, Levitt Peak at Sonora Pass in Immigrant Wilderness, Mount Dana at Tioga Pass in Yosemite, first peak over 13,000 feet, and Mount Conness, which is also above Tioga Pass, near the eastern gate of Yosemite. Then I did my first Class 3 peak, Matterhorn Peak in Hoover Wilderness. Up to this point, I had suffered, but not like this. At 12,285 feet, Matterhorn Peak is the tallest peak in the Sawtooth Ridge of the Sierras. It is also the northernmost peak over 12,000 feet in the Sierras. This one made me nervous because looking up at it from Bridgeport, it looked like a death trap for someone with little to no climbing skills like myself. I was sore from climbing Mount Dana the day before, but when that alarm went off at 4 a.m., I headed to the trailhead. With a distance of 14.5 miles ahead and about 5,150 feet of elevation gain, I knew that I would have to dig deeper than I ever have to find true grit if I wanted to stand on its knife tip summit with 1,500 foot cliffs on both sides. Then I arrived at the last section, a 1,500 foot ascent over a half mile with a few hundred feet of Class 3 section, or with a few hundred feet of Class 3 terrain. With good route finding to reach the summit, it was steep and extremely tough, but just focusing on one more step, I accomplished it. I had never felt that alive in my life. Doing hard things and taking risks makes you feel more alive than anything else. Having an objective and not quitting until you achieve it creates purpose. It is not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves. Edmund Hillary, which was the first guy, the first Westerner with his Sherpas to summit Mount Everest. It is not the mountain that we climb. It is not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves. I love that quote because it's so true. The next mountain I set my sights on was Mount Ritter. At 13,149 feet, Ritter is the tallest in the Ritter Range, sitting in Ansel Adams Wilderness on the eastern edge of Yosemite National Park. Ritter and its sister Banner Peak are considered by many to be the most prominent peaks of the High Sierra. With a 20-mile round trip, about 6,000 feet of elevation gain, including around 3,500 feet of Class 2 to 3 scrambling and a glacier traverse, it is quite the feat to stand on its summit where John Muir once stood. Well, I failed 3 times over the next couple years. We had a vendetta. The first time was due to snow and ice, lack of equipment, and skill level. The second time I attempted the western slope, which is not a common route, with a long, brutal approach and a 50-pound pack. The third time, well, I almost died. I started on the 9-mile approach at around 2 a.m. with no sleep the day or night before. I felt solid this third time, made good time on the 9-mile approach, and ascended to the Southeast Glacier on the Southeast Glacier route of Ritter. I felt so good that I didn't want to waste time putting on my crampons to traverse the glacier, so I looked up at a chute on the right that led to the summit ridge and gave it hell. I got a couple of 100 feet up the chute and realized I was standing on a giant steep pile of loose scree. You could say it was a bit unnerving. I felt as if I went down, it would undoubtedly cause a decent amount of rock fall on top of me. So I looked up and decided to ascend the next 600 feet up the chute to the summit ridge. It only got worse. It was about a 70-degree slope and it was all loose. Maybe even steep, probably like 80%. And it was all loose. It's one thing when you are climbing and have a solid rock to hold on to, you feel like you are in control. But when every rock around you wants to give way, throwing you 600 feet down the chute, causing a rock slide on top of you, your sympathetic nervous system starts to take over. There were about 8 times I remember in that chute that the wrong decision or movement would have meant death. I remember this one in particular. Realizing the dire situation I had gotten myself into, I began to panic. I was on this mountain alone with no one to save me. 10 miles from the trailhead, every rock wanted to give way below my feet, sending me hurtling 600 feet below, causing a rock slide on top of me. I looked to my left and I looked to my right. There were no solid rocks within 15 feet of me. And the ones that looked solid could be ready to give way as well. My heart rate started to rise. A picture flashed into my mind, me lying 600 feet below, mangled after taking a nasty fall. The slightest wrong move could have made this a reality. I thought about making a break for the wall of the chute to find a solid rock that would indeed send 500-pound rocks hurtling down the chute below me. Then I stopped. I took a deep breath. Exhaled. This is what I told myself. If you panic, you're dead. Get control of yourself. No one is here to save you. So I focused on my breathing, quelling the sympathetic nervous system and tapping into the parasympathetic nervous system. This situation required me to be calm to make the right decisions. I very carefully moved to the wall of the chute and continued ascending while focusing on my breath. After that, I had multiple close calls, but I stayed calm and collected. By the time I reached the summit ridge, I narrowly escaped a fatal mistake. I had about a 45-minute boulder hop and scramble to the summit. By this time, I was over it. I just wanted to find a safe way down and make the 10-mile hike out and the 4-hour drive home. I failed a third time to reach the summit of this High Sierra beast. I will tell you this story in detail to highlight a few life-changing lessons I learned that day. Lesson 1, don't cut corners. I took that chute for one because it looked like fun climbing, but I did it because I didn't want to stop for 10 minutes to put on my crampons. I was in the moment and completely forgot that one of my High Sierra guidebooks, it says that this chute will look enticing, but do not take it because it is filled with talus. Lesson 2, learn to breathe. Many overlook the importance of knowing how to breathe properly. It is vital and could even save your life one day. Breathing regulates your heart rate through something called heart rate variability. Breathe through your nose, take longer, deeper breaths, and you can learn how to manage stress. Lesson 3, you can only make sound decisions if your mind is calm. Again, remember to breathe. Lesson 4, if you are that close to the summit and your life is not in danger, finish the damn climb, because of course I had to go back again. Before returning to Ritter for my 4th attempt, I must touch on a few other accomplishments in 2020. I summited Mount Whitney at 14,508 feet. It is the tallest mountain in the contiguous United States. That was a challenge and a great victory. Then I did the hardest one I had ever done, Mount Williamson. At 14,380 feet, Mount Williamson is the second tallest mountain in California, second to Whitney. And many nicknaming it the K2 of the Sierras, it is not a mountain to be taken lightly. Clocking in 25 miles and over 10,000 feet of elevation gain, this beast is only for the truly dedicated. After hauling my ridiculous 50-pound pack 7,000 feet to the top of Shepherd's Pass, I was exhausted. After sleeping, myself and 2 girls I met on the trail went for the summit. It was brutal with the steep, loose west slope of the mountain and a Class 3 chimney at the top to gain the summit ridge. Nevertheless, 2 of us made it to the top. I did not train much to do this one, but I had to do something extremely hard to prove that I had what it took to take on another big trip I had planned a few weeks later. That trip to tackle my first Cascade Peak, Mount Rainier. Mount Rainier stands as an icon in the Washington landscape. At 14,411 feet, Mount Rainier is the tallest mountain in the Cascade Range, the most topographically prominent mountain in the contiguous United States, the largest stratovolcano in the lower 48, and the most glaciated mountain in the U.S. outside of Alaska. To climb it, you must have a rope team and have skills in crevasse rescue, glacier travel, and self-arresting, which we had very little of. Up to this point, I had only done smaller peaks with hikes in the snow, so to say this was over my head and above my skill level is an understatement. With about 9,000 feet of elevation gain on very steep snow and glacial terrain, it is intimidating. And I and now good buddy, Sertan, planned this climb before we even met. I reached out to him for beta on a peak, and within a year, we were making the 12-hour drive to Mount Rainier National Park to give this beast our all. I drove the whole way, leaving at 9 p.m. the night before. We planned to get there around 3 p.m. the next day, camp, and then hike up to Camp Muir the next morning. Once we got there, we decided to immediately ascend the 5,000 feet up Muir snowfield to Camp Muir. Yes, I did this without sleeping for 2 days. You will find that is a common thing for me. Being tired is just a feeling. When you have an objective like this, being tired is just a feeling when you have an objective like this. We got to Camp Muir just as the sun set. We spent the whole next day there and started our climb at 2 a.m. the following night up the Disappointment Cleaver route. When we woke up, the last thing I wanted to do was actually go. It's quite an intimidating mountain with over 100 climbing deaths, and I wasn't an experienced mountaineer. But in the face of that fear, I got up and put my boots on. we roped up and put our crampons on, headlamps on, and headed across the Cowlitz Glacier, over the Cathedral Gap, and then across Ingram Glacier towards Disappointment Cleaver. Before reaching the nose of Disappointment Cleaver, you must cross a section underneath called the Bowling Alley. This is one of the most dangerous sections on the route due to rockfall, so you want to make it through quickly. After that, you ascend about 1,000 feet up the rocky Cleaver. At this point, it was still dark, but I remember looking back and seeing about 8,000 feet of an extremely steep mountain in the darkness below me. So steep that if you fell or slipped, your chances of stopping your fall were slim to none. By the time we reached the top of the Cleaver, the sun had started to rise. We still had to ascend about 2,500 feet up the Emmons Glacier to reach the summit crater. The Emmons is the biggest glacier in the lower 48, the contiguous United States. This section consisted of a skinny snow trail on extremely steep terrain with snow bridges over crevasses. Damn, was this section hard. Have you ever been so exhausted that it's hard to take another step? 14,000 feet elevation doesn't make it any easier either. I've been there many times, and all that matters is that next step. Finally, we reach the summit crater and start to cross. We were in so much pain and misery that a few hundred feet from the summit, we both collapsed on the ground and couldn't stop laughing. We couldn't stop laughing because of how much pain and misery we were in, and the fact that once we reached the summit, we still had to descend 9,000 feet down the most prominent peak in the lower 48 and drive 12 hours home. Reaching that summit was an accomplishment, but the work is far from over, as 80% of climbing accidents happen on the descent. The descent was sketchy as the sun softened the snow and got stuck in your crampons. One mistake, trip, or slip could very well mean sliding 8,000 feet down the mountain, only being stopped shortly by an open crevasse. I couldn't tell my story without adding my first summit of Rainier. The lesson I learned from this complicated undertaking were these. If you set a challenging objective or goal, you will almost always want to quit when it's time to start or when things get hard. The feeling of excitement and motivation will leave you. But if you want to be great, sometimes you must get up, put your boots on, and start. This concept goes for anything in life. Get up, put your boots on, and start. The next lesson is this. If you want to start something new, like a new hobby, do not wait for others to join you, or you will never start. Start going alone. Eventually, you will find your tribe who also enjoys the same things as you do. Later that year, I made my fourth return to Ritter. This time, I was there for blood. I was gonna get it. After doing Rainier and Williamson, Ritter was no longer a daunting task. Although still far from easy, I slept a couple of hours in my truck at the trailhead and started around 3 a.m. I made good time on the 9-mile approach and started climbing up the Class 3 Southeast Glacier route a little after sunrise. This time I passed the chute I made the mistake of taking the last time and put my crampons on to traverse the glacier up to the more solid Secker chute further up the glacier. As I gained the summit ridge, I was struggling with every step. But this pain and struggle I was all too familiar with. I knew I had this one bagged. I scrambled another 45 minutes absolutely exhausted in that thin oxygen environment at 13,000 feet. Finally, I reached the summit of Mount Ritter after failing 3 times previously. Although this wasn't the biggest or tallest mountain I climbed, it was the most rewarding. After shedding a few tears and enjoying the summit, I began my descent and 9-mile hike back to my truck. I clocked 19.9 miles, 5,830 feet of elevation gain, and a moving time of 9 hours and 59 minutes. Under 10 hours. If something is meaningful to you, do not quit until you accomplish it. I have done hundreds of hikes, trail runs, smaller peaks between these, and a few peaks this past year. Mount Langley of 14 or Mount Agassiz in the Palisade Crest, and I now have a vendetta with Middle Palisade as I have failed it twice. It is very tough and quite dangerous terrain, but I will get it one of these days. and a few more. I also climbed Mount Rainier for a second time this year with my friend Bree that I met on Mount Williamson, the one that I summited with. And I climbed a few peaks in Utah, Mount Timpanogos, Lone Peak, and I know there's a few more in there, but and I climbed Mount Shasta, which is another 14,000 foot stratovolcano in Northern California in the Cascade Range. That one was hard. I tell you these stories of climbing mountains not to brag, but because the lessons I have learned have been life-changing and can be applied to life. The lessons can be told in a quick story and tied to how we can all live better lives. Here it is. To live a meaningful life, you must set your eyes on an objective that excites you. The feeling in which you set that goal will pass, I promise you that. But what matters is that when it's time to start climbing that mountain in your life, it doesn't matter how you feel. Sometimes you have to get up, put your boots on, and start. Then you have to break down the goal into smaller sections. Yes, you know the overall objective, the summit of this behemoth task or mountain in front of you. But if you only focus on the summit or end goal, it will seem unattainable or too hard, so you will quit. The trick is to narrow your focus on the next task, the next step, the next ridgeline. The end goal will guide you in the right direction and give you the determination to continue, but without the next step, you will never reach the summit. Things will get complicated and painful, but if you always believe you can take just one more step before you know it, you will be standing on the summit of achievement. Then once that summit or objective is reached, you must find the next more significant goal to continue growing. Without pursuing something to look forward to, what is the meaning of life? That is the life lesson I have learned through all the pain and misery I have intentionally put myself through, and I will continue to do so. Pain is certain, suffering is optional. Jay French. Pain is certain, suffering is optional. That's a good quote. Today, as I write this, I still live in my home on a 10-acre mountaintop with my love, Chloe, now my wife. I'm still a heavy equipment operator running an asphalt mill, although I started at a different company this year with more opportunities to grow. I work out regularly and am always looking to learn and grow. I am furthering my education in nutrition and fitness, and I just picked up a new hobby, archery. I plan to start bow hunting as a new challenge in the coming years. I still have bigger mountain objectives like Aconcagua in the Andes in Argentina and Mount Denali in Alaska. However, it's time to put most of my focus on a vision I have been putting together for years. A vision that I had to get to a certain level of self-belief, growth, and knowledge in order to execute. I will never stop growing, and I will never have it all figured out. But remember, it's the pursuit that gives life meaning. That new project I am finally setting out on is in your hands. The Command Project. Accomplishing things in your own life is great, something you should never stop chasing, but we must also contribute to a better world. This can be done minute by minute, day to day, by being kind to others, living with integrity, setting a positive example for others, and helping people. This is my way of helping and contributing. My new mission is to help others take command of their lives, to make a better future. It starts with the individual. It starts on the individual level. What can you do as an individual? You have way more impact than you may think. Every day, someone is watching you and looking up to you. What kind of example will you set? The Command Project is about helping you take command of your life so that you can create a life you are proud of, so you can be happy and have a life with purpose. You must put yourself first, because without putting everything you've got into growing to become better, stronger, and more capable, you won't be able to give those around you the extraordinary life that you are capable of creating. If we focus on ourselves to become that badass motherfucker we know that we are born to be, together we can become the next generation of leaders to make living with integrity badass again. Together we can create a positive impact that can change the world. But first, you must take command of your own life. So if you are ready to step into the commander's role of your life, let's get this project started and take command. So that was the next chapter, the About Me section of my book, Take Command of Your Mind, Body, and Future. That was a pretty tough chapter for me to read. Like I said, most of that I haven't actually told anybody or talked about it to anybody besides my wife. So, you know, it was a hard chapter for me to read, but it felt good to get it out there. But yeah, so moving on, now we're going to start taking command of your mind, your body, and your future so that you can take command of your life, so that we can unify as highly effective individuals who are in the commander's role of our life, so that we can go out and become the next generation of leaders to make living with integrity badass again. So I hope you guys enjoyed this chapter of the book. For those of you who made it all the way through, I know it was a longer episode. I appreciate you for caring about listening to my About Me section. I appreciate you a lot. And I look forward to diving into the next few chapters that are about you taking command of your life, about your mind, your body, your future, and your life. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please share it with your friends, family, coworkers, anybody who you think would like to read this book, hear it, or resonates with the message of the Command Project. So until next time, join me on this mission of becoming the next generation of leaders to make living with integrity badass again. I'm your host, Trenton Ebersol, and now it is time to take command.